Historically, Clemson University is seen as the legacy of Thomas Green Clemson, but before the land that became an agricultural and military school belonged to him, it was in the Calhoun family. As early as the late 1700s, the Fort Hill plantation entered the Calhoun family by John Ewing Calhoun. Kept in the family by his wife, the plantation was eventually passed down to John C. Calhoun and his wife, Floride. John and Floride didn't always live on the plantation. They at first lived in Washington, D.C., where Calhoun held several positions, including vice president and U.S. senator. After resigning from office, the Calhouns moved to Fort Hill to rent from Floride Bonu Calhoun, John C. Calhoun's mother-in-law. While his mother-in-law was alive, it's believed that she had a very strong influence on Calhoun.
During their time on the plantation, the Calhouns mainly grew cotton on their land, and it's estimated they had somewhere between 50 and 130 enslaved Africans and African Americans during the years the plantation was still alive, while most were acquired under Andrew Calhoun. When a New York reporter traveled to the plantation, he mentioned how some of the enslaved worked small bits of land for profit. He was allowed to cultivate some 4 or 5 acres of land for cotton and other things, the proceeds of which became his property and sometimes produced $30 to $50 a season. This is a privilege, however, that Mr. Calhoun allows his slaves and all have a patch containing more or less acres of cotton. Many of the enslaved people were allowed to cultivate the land behind the slave quarters, and many had incredible knowledge of the cotton industry and foreign cotton markets. The reporter also observed a marriage between one of Calhoun's slaves and a slave from a nearby plantation. It was noted that the enslaved people on the Fort Hill plantation were able to take the Sabbath off to attend church at either St. Paul's Episcopal Church or the Old Stone Presbyterian Church. The slaves also had 4 days off for Christmas.
Slavery on Fort Hill was not without resistance. There was occasionally attempts to run away or rebel against the Calhouns. John C. Calhoun mentioned in his letters the actions of 3 enslaved people in particular that displeased him: Alec, Swanee, and Issei. Alec, the only male house slave on the Fort Hill plantation, once offended Floride Calhoun and ran away in fear. John C. Calhoun requested that when he was captured, that Alec be placed in jail with adequate food and water for 10 days and then be given 30 lashes. Swanee was the son of John C. Calhoun's childhood companion, Old Swanee, and was given special privileges because of this relationship. One such privilege was that of doctor's care. On the way to the doctor one day, Swanee set fire to the overseer's tent, attempting to kill him. Swanee was sent to Canebrake Plantation in Alabama, which was owned by John C. Calhoun's oldest son, Andrew. Issei was another one of Old Swanee's children who attempted to burn down Fort Hill by placing hot coals under a pillow. Her punishment was unknown, but she remained at Fort Hill until later freed.
Even though Calhoun was seen to treat the enslaved people on his plantation with respect, his opinion on slavery was still very unpopular with Northerners and abolitionists. He held a view very reminiscent of the later white man's burden, a white supremacist view on civilizing other cultures. He treated slavery as a necessary good and not an evil. Calhoun viewed himself as a model slave owner in a Southerner's eyes, though he was closer to some than a Southerner would have deemed appropriate, such as with his childhood friend, Swanee. He held to most standards of treatment, care, and punishment that slaveholders generally agreed upon. He even gave advice to his son-in-law, Thomas Green Clemson, to not rent out slaves for money because they would be treated poorly.
The enslaved people at the Fort Hill plantation were housed in long stone barracks, located 1/8 of a mile from the main house around where the Chick-fil-A and Lee Hall are today. The bricks of these buildings were later repurposed by African-American convict laborers as they built some of Clemson University's earliest buildings, such as Tillman and Hardin Hall. These stones would serve as the literal foundation for which Clemson University was built as well as to symbolize the often forced but important role African Americans served in the establishment of Clemson University. And just as John C. Calhoun inherited the plantation through his wife, Thomas Green Clemson also inherited the plantation through his wife, Anna Maria Calhoun Clemson. Though Thomas Clemson is usually attributed to the foundation of Clemson University, it was his wife, Anna Maria, who requested the land be used for an agricultural college in her will. Thomas Clemson followed her wishes, and having outlived all other possible heirs, willed the land and much of his estate to the state of South Carolina for the express purpose of creating an agricultural college, stating that it should combine, if practicable, physical and intellectual education, and should be a high seminary of learning in which the graduate of the common schools can commence, pursue, and finish the courses of studies terminating in through theoretic and practical instruction in those sciences and arts which bear directly upon agriculture.